There was a time when your water bill was a single line on a rate notice. So small, most families barely noticed it. Today, a typical Sydney household pays over $1,200 a year, with more than $8 billion in desalination debt still flowing through to customers. How Australian water became one of the fastest rising household costs starts well before the bills got heavy. In the decades after the war, water was simply part of the background of Australian life. For most families, the quarterly rate notice arrived with a single, almost forgettable line: water supply delivered at cost. The Sydney Water Board, the Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works, and their counterparts in every state were public agencies, run by engineers and local officials, not corporate executives or accountants. Their charter was clear: provide safe, reliable water to every home and charge only enough to cover the basic expenses of pipes, treatment and maintenance. No profit, no dividend, no hidden fees. A retired engineer from the old Sydney Water Board, recalling the 1970s, described a culture where the job was seen as public service. Board minutes from that era talk about community benefit and cost recovery only. Rainwater tanks dotted suburban backyards, a quiet insurance policy against dry spells. The idea of water as a bill to worry about would have seemed strange. Most households paid a flat rate, sometimes just a few dollars per month. The average charge for water in 1975 was barely noticed, lost among the other council rates. There was a sense that water belonged to everyone, managed for the good of the city, not for revenue. Archival rate notices from the time show one or two lines, nothing like the itemised statements of today. Water was a public good, not a product. For older Australians, these memories linger: the taste of rainwater off a corrugated iron tank, the quiet confidence that the tap would always run, and the bill would never sting. In the 1990s, the logic of public service gave way to a new set of rules. State governments, under pressure from treasuries and economic advisors, began to treat water not just as a basic right, but as a business unit. The Victorian Water Act of 1994 formally dissolved the old Melbourne Metropolitan Board of Works, splitting it into separate retail companies: Yarra Valley Water, City West Water and South East Water. These new entities were still owned by the state, but their charters now demanded commercial accounting, annual profit targets and a dividend paid back to Treasury. Sydney followed a similar path. In 1995, the Sydney Water Board became Sydney Water Corporation, a state-owned company with a legal requirement to operate efficiently and deliver a return on assets. The rules were clear. Water utilities had to behave like businesses, not departments. Each year, a portion of their surplus, often $60 to $80 million, was transferred directly to the state budget as a dividend. This was no longer about just covering costs. Profit had become part of the equation. To oversee this new regime, independent regulators were created. Victoria established the Essential Services Commission, while New South Wales set up IPA-RT. Their job was to approve price increases and monitor performance, but also to ensure that utilities met their dividend obligations. Treasury memos from the period spell out the intent: water bills should recover not just the cost of pipes and treatment, but also the capital invested and a steady stream of revenue for the state. The language of public good faded, replaced by terms like rate of return, asset base, and cost-reflective pricing. Water was no longer just a service, it was now an asset expected to pay its way. The scale of investment in Australia's urban water infrastructure over the past 2 decades is unlike anything that came before. In Sydney, the construction of the Kurnell desalination plant carried a price tag of $1.9 billion. Melbourne's Wonthaggi plant, with its vast tunnels and reverse osmosis trains, cost an even larger $5.7 billion when financing and escalation are included. These two projects alone account for nearly $8 billion in capital outlay, and that figure climbs higher once the Gold Coast, Perth and Adelaide plants are added to the tally. Altogether, the national desalination build-out from 2007 to 2012 exceeded $8 billion in upfront costs. Timelines for these projects were tight. Sydney's plant broke ground in 2008 and was commissioned for full operation by 2011. Melbourne's was built between 2009 and 2012, with the first water delivered in 2013. The Commonwealth contributed significant grants, $500 million for Sydney and hundreds of millions more for the other states, while the rest was covered by a mix of state treasury loans, private equity and long-term debt. These investments were justified as drought insurance, but the cost was always destined to flow through to households. Every dollar spent on these capital works is now baked into the bill. The sheer scale of these projects dwarfs the old days of modest council-funded upgrades. Today's infrastructure is financed over decades, with repayments structured into the standing charges and service fees that appear on every quarterly statement. The numbers are hard to ignore. Billions in capital outlay locked in by contract and ultimately recovered from ratepayers. Contracts for Australia's desalination plants contain clauses that commit state governments and, by extension, every water customer, to pay tens of millions of dollars a year regardless of how much water is actually produced. These are known as availability payments or take or pay clauses. In Sydney, the agreement for the Kurnell plant requires an annual payment of about $70 million, even if the plant sits idle for months or years. The same pattern holds in Melbourne, where the Wonthaggi Facilities contract locks in a $70 million capacity payment each year for the first 2 decades. Brisbane's Gold Coast plant, Perth's Kwinana and Adelaide's Port Stanvac all operate under similar terms, with fixed payments that range from $45 million to $65 million a year. These sums are not tied to how much water is delivered. Whether the plants run at full tilt during a drought or stand mothballed in a wet year, the payments flow. For households, this means a portion of every quarterly bill covers these fixed charges, money that must be paid before a single litre reaches the tap. During the period from 2014 to 2017, Melbourne's plant ran at under 5% capacity, yet the operator still received its full annual fee. In Adelaide, the state paid $50 million a year, while the plant remained on standby. A typical contract clause says the state shall make an availability payment of $70 million per year, irrespective of water produced. These obligations are not easily renegotiated or cancelled. They are designed to guarantee revenue for the private operators, shifting the risk away from investors and onto the public. The result is a system where households are locked into paying for infrastructure, whether it is needed or not, with these fixed costs now a permanent fixture in the price of water. A typical water bill today arrives thick with detail, pages of line items, each one a small but steady drain on the household budget. The headline number for many families in Sydney and Melbourne now sits above $1,200 a year. This is not just about how much water you use. The bill is split into fixed service charges, infrastructure repayments, environmental levies, and capacity payments for desalination plants that appear in the fine print, whether the plants are running or not. Even before a single litre flows from the tap, customers are locked into paying hundreds of dollars in standing fees. For working-class households and pensioners, these charges land with particular force. A pensioner in Western Sydney, living on a fixed income, opens her quarterly bill and sees nearly $300 due, almost a week's pension gone in one hit. A family in Melbourne's outer suburbs, already stretched by rent and groceries, faces a similar story. The regulator's reports spell it out. More than half the average bill is now made up of fixed costs that cannot be avoided. For those on tight budgets, there is little room to cut back. Water is not a luxury, but the numbers on the bill keep climbing, line by line, year after year. Along the rivers of the Murray-Darling Basin, water has become a commodity traded on open markets, far removed from the old days of community-managed supply. In the past decade alone, more than $3 billion worth of water entitlements have changed hands across the basin. The scale is staggering. In 2021, a single foreign agribusiness group purchased 120 gigalitres of senior water rights, enough to supply a regional city for years. These trades are not just numbers on a ledger. For small towns in the riverina, each transfer can mean less water in the river, tighter restrictions, and higher charges for the households left behind. A resident from Griffith remembers when the river ran full year round and water was a birthright, not a bid. Now the Basin Plan's own reviews show an ecological shortfall of 6 gigalitres per year, with environmental flows unable to keep pace with what is sold to the highest bidder. Local surveys reveal deep unease. 60% of residents believe the system favours large corporate interests over family farms and communities. The logic of the market, once confined to city utilities, now shapes every drop from Queensland to South Australia. Water is no longer just a service. It is an asset, a trade, and for many in the basin, a growing source of worry. Today, water is no longer a silent line on the rates notice. It's a quarterly charge shaped by corporatisation, infrastructure debt, and market logic. As household budgets stretch, the question remains, should essential water flow like a business or like a public good? Let me know your thoughts below.